We've got time to take a few observations or questions from the audience. Kate.
So we've been listening for a long time, and thank you so much for your wonderful attention. So let's just take a few minutes to turn to the people sitting near us and just, what's something you heard that excited you, or something that you read in this edition that you'd like to, that stays with you? So just take a few minutes to chat among yourselves, and then we'll take some, and if you have any questions or comments, we'll take those in about 10 minutes. We'll just give a chance for you to breathe from listening and just have a chat. And those of you on Zoom, it'd be a good chance for you to get up from your computers and iPads and just have a stretch. But any comments and thoughts you'd like to share in the chat, Bethany will share those with all of us. Okay, everyone. This is the time now for you to share some of your thoughts, questions that might be arising, maybe some memories. We haven't named everything. We haven't tried to remember everyone, so there may be something or someone that you would like to mention as well. So who'd like to start? Yes, and tell us your name if you don't mind.
Hello, my name's Tony Robertson. I'm from Brisbane, and I'm an Eremos voyeur. So right from the start, I was collecting, and it's interesting because I got caught up in the whole rental upheaval that's part of Australian reality at the moment, and I had to give away my Eremos collection because I had to give away most of my books because I now live where I cannot have books as much. So the Franciscan spirit has grown exponentially. But my question, and I'm really passionate about the issues we've talked about and that nurturing for the next generation. So my question is it time now we've done the text and the visual, is it time to move into the audio with podcasting? Or I've even been talking to helping this community get in touch with the music of people like Trish Watts and other emerging musicians. And the other big question is, what about some of the young rappers, Indigenous rappers, who are speaking out of that First Nation spirituality that is now being celebrated in a whole new cultural milieu with rap and hip-hop? And that might be woo further down, but I'd really like to ask, and I'd be keen to help contribute. I work in social media, and I really think moving into the audio, podcasting, etc., may be part of the look around and the next generation.
Thank you, Tony. Who'd like to tackle that one?
I don't know about rap music. It's not synonymous with Eremos to me, but Tony, your point is right. The one thing that stays in the back of my head the whole time is the connection with new generations. That's crucial. Not just for the survival of Eremos, that's not the point. It's because what we're offering is really significant for them. Just anecdotally, when I was a teacher, what I found, I used to have meditations among kids where they were, and sort of imaginative meditations. Kids love silence. And they're not getting it. They're not getting enough of it. And one of the things that Linda mentioned that we haven't talked a lot about with Eremos is its contemplative tradition. And we need to be passing that on. It's one of the oldest traditions in Christianity, in any religion really, and it needs to be passed on. And so that's one thing I'd say. The other thing is, I think you're dead right about podcasts and something audio. I think that's absolutely crucial. We live in a more visual and oral generation in society than we ever have. So I would say that's Glenda's responsibility. But seriously, involved with that, we need people with that kind of expertise. Yep, that's all.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but in the last few years, the New York Times has published a number of articles about a thing they called weird Christianity. And they've been amazing articles, and it's probably they're in, a contrast to the awful things that are happening with what the word evangelical means in America now. But it's been, they've interviewed a lot of young people who've kind of returned to almost like an Anglo-Catholic kind of tradition and found a huge amount in that.
Lovely. Good, thank you.
Could I just make one observation on that? I do think that podcasts, you're faced with social media, you too can be on your iPhone talking to the world, but I do think that you're right about podcasting, because podcasting, unlike visuals, requires focus on the word ultimately, and most podcasts are done by people reading a script or conversing with someone, as we have here, about substantive ideas. So I think podcasts are more important than, say, YouTube or whatever else. I think the audio thing is a critical niche, and it can be done by everyone. The cost of a microphone is not very much, and it can sit on a stand and you can read off a text. So I've got a number of... The ABC has was one of the pioneers in podcasts, a guy called Stan Corrie and Stephen Rapley, who Stephen's the Uniting Church member in Newtown, did some of the first podcasts in the world about 25 years ago now. So I do think that you're absolutely right about that being a way in which the printed word can maintain itself. And you get people who have got weight being able to do podcasts. So you can go to any one of a number of them, from eminent historians right now, today. Press a button and you can find where they are.
So another question or comment? Carolyn.
We've been having a very interesting discussion here about community and about how Eremos has always stood for absence of dogma. But more broadly, I just wanted to pick up on one of the most interesting events, I think, in my 2 years as executive director at Eremos was, and this is a while back, was an intergenerational conversation. And this was a buzz. We had just an evening of about 3 hours. We had about 20, 25 people. And the basic thing was a dialogue between people in their 20s and people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, might have been somebody in their 80s at that point, and it was basically talking about what is it like to have faith and what happens to you in your life and how does it change and how do we grow, how do we develop, what is difficult. It was extremely free and open discussion. It did happen in a room and there was supper, and since then, I've been involved in one other intergenerational conversation. It's about the wisdom of aging, and this was, again, about a dialogue between some older people and a number of younger people. It can be done, and I think it is a challenge with this rich tradition that Eremos has had, how do we engage? But I think there are forums, obviously, yes, podcasts and social media, but there are also gatherings in the room that create a kind of energy and a kind of imaginative space for things to happen.
Somebody at the back?
Bethany's got some information from our Zoom people.
Yes, so I have some extra comments from our friends on Zoom. One about the magazine. A suggestion is inviting regular contributors to invite a younger reader to contribute to generate the next wave. And that going forward, the role of Eremos may be, among other things, to create space for lamentation and hope regarding the coinciding global crises with regional and diverse voices. Another comment that Eremos is a place and space for all voices to be heard respectfully without the polarising black and white views that seem to be prevalent in mainstream and social media platforms. Yes, did you have a comment?
Yes, Les Higgins. For me, Eremos is substantially the book group experience. Not totally, but substantially. And as we contemplate both the past and the future here, I think it's very worthwhile to consider the contribution that this aspect of Eremos has made. Speaking personally, as I'm indicating, it's been very central to my journey, and I can speak for Giselle here, who's with me. And I would rather hope that we have a moment to acknowledge the great value that or the great worth of these experiences. I remember in the early days that our group, which has endured, by the way, in one form or another for decades, that it was serviced wonderfully by the magazine and then by the resources and the suggestions and the books that were actually provided by the Eremos personnel. So I want to say thank you very much for that, and to suggest that we just consider the past and the future of the book group within the Eremos context.
Les, thank you so much for that comment, because during my time working for Eremos, was very involved with the book groups and also with the bookshop. In the early days, the books were incredibly important. Right from the start, there was a mail order bookshop and also like a little bookshop front at Newtown Church after Sunday service. And those books, you know, Reaching Out by Henri Nouwen and Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster, you know, they went on to be really cherished books, some of them in the book group discussion scheme. Jackie Pryor put a huge amount of work in. Another lady called Angela worked with her. And I have read that being in a book group is one of the most life-changing experiences a person can have. And I feel sadness that, well, I know there's some groups continuing. Eremos has not had a big thrust behind generating book group discussions of late. It is hard. COVID put a dampener on a lot of things. The internet, the media, the cost of books, they're all big problems. But I really hear what you're saying, and it's great we can have book reviews in the magazine, but that group experience of discussing something. I've been in a book group for over a couple of decades myself, and formative stuff, fantastic. One of the great things about Eremos all through the 40 years has been that no one's out to make you a Christian. Nobody's out to say, in particular criteria, you will be going to hell, you'll be going to heaven. That is an absolute freedom. That is something that Eremos has had uniquely all along. Even in the really early days when it was very Christian focused and the purposes were to deepen Christian spirituality, there wasn't a judgmental attitude. And in the book group discussions that people had, open house, people could express what they felt with trust and empathy received, and I think they were a very nourishing aspect of Eremos. Thanks so much for your comment.
Just to follow up, with COVID, I actually, based on our experience with book groups, I actually started one over Zoom during Phosphorescence, Julia Baird's book, with a group of people from my church, and it was very much along the same lines, an open book group, non-judgmental, and it was just a way of helping us to cope, in those days when we weren't allowed to go out the house. I know face-to-face can be tricky, and it has been tricky for our group as people have moved away, etc. But doing things on Zoom, and we did go on Zoom for quite a while, and it's feasible. It's not too taxing, and with a bit of facilitation, you know, somebody needs to be able to be the host and the co-host. It's not that difficult, and it may be a way forward of engaging people, because it seems to be a low-risk strategy, because you sort of say, look, we're going to talk about this book for 5 weeks, here's a book review, and people are just committing for that short time. So it's not as if you're going to get swallowed up and somebody's going to convert you or Bible bash you or whatever. Yeah.
Thanks, Giselle.
Yes. One of the things that I've been a part of for a long time on and off has been interfaith dialogue. And whether it's, and of course you're discussing things like theology, church, how you live out your faith, family, all those sorts of things. But the thing that has come up for me over a long, long time is the human connection between the people that you would know. And when there were bomb threats at Moss, or when there was a whole lot of rioting in the Southern Shire, or when there was a whole lot of anti-Jewish things going on at the heart of the city, the things that would keep us going and the things that meant a lot for me was that we knew each other as people, and we knew each other's families' birthdays, and we'd actually have some meals together. And it became, and we all were able to say over a period of time how that has become much more important than discussions around theology. And I've been sitting here thinking about this and keying into what John's saying when he said he interviewed Greg Sheridan, and there was something important about interviewing someone who was very, very different from him and the human connection that came. I'm wondering, is this a space that Eremos needs to make come alive, to enable?
Yes. It seems to me that that's the future of where we are, acknowledging our common humanity. It's interesting when Linda was talking before about, you know, the idea of no dogma and things like that. Without wishing to sound trite, I once heard somebody say that people enter the church through the front door and leave through the roof. And the idea that the church sometimes becomes too small for them. And I think one of the things that should be acknowledged that I noticed over reading over the 40 years is that some of the people who are seminal to Eremos in the early years moved beyond the Christian faith. And it's interesting that if that happens in a church, then you leave the church. But they stayed and they kept writing articles. And I think that's one of the huge strengths of Eremos, is it's looked beyond what you believe to who you are. So I think that's true.
Are there more comments from Zoom, Bethany? This might be our last ones, I think.
Yes, so there's some comments about the importance of various Eremos groups being vitally important. And questions about the opportunity for some Zoom book groups into the future.
Thank you. I might hand it back to John now to wrap up us for today. Thank you all very much for your comments, and I'm sure there's more that could be said. As always, that's a good time to end, isn't it, when there's more to say?
The conversation must continue, yes. Just to round this up, I do think that the last few observations have been critical to any future discussion and direction. And I was brought to focus on this by the engagement I've had over recent weeks with the Muslim celebration of Ramadan. and particularly the iftar meals. Now, it's not just the fact of going to people's homes. It goes to that essential point about hospitality, about it's there that the faith communicates itself. And in doing that, I was reminded that this year, it's a completely different thought, but they coincide, that this year marks the 140th anniversary worldwide of the Salvation Army introducing social services, formal social services, as part of its organisational structure. And you say, hang on, I thought they always did that. Salvation Army started off as a classic revivalist agency. The place it started was here in Australia, with a young man called James Barker. And at the time, there was a lot of discussion about the importance of personal holiness and the holiness movement, the Keswick movement, or other things. And Barker was asked about this. And he said, oh yes, I do agree with the second blessing, but it seems to me essential to the Lord's work is that it's expressed in a practical way. And I think that's something that has run through the thread of what Eremos has been saying over the years. Our spirituality expresses itself in fellowship, in hospitality, in being. So I think today's conversation has gone around in a large circle, but it has centred on something that has been critically important, and that there is a way forward in finding those things. I'd like to thank all of you and the invitation, and particularly to Kate. And there are, I guess, some sorts of little thank yous and credits that need to be offered at the moment.
And we're going to have the blessing. I'm just about to hand over to Joe. Yeah. So, no, I hadn't forgotten. Thank you, Josephine Inkpin, the minister, Dr. Reverend Josephine Inkpin, the minister here for Pitt Street, is going to send us out and give us a blessing.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone involved today. Thank you on behalf of Pitt Street, Uniting Church which rejoices to work with Eremos as an essential, gentle, subversive accomplice. I want to offer some words of blessing from a fellow Eremos member, words which are written for the recent World Pride celebrations, but they're much broader. Because in a sense, they're queer prayers with, the little exclamation marks things. Queer as in the sense of being a subversive verb rather than a descriptive noun or adjective for the alphabet soup. In other words, being far more than a supposed ideology or even eschewing the political left and right, but actually much more parabolic and mysterious than we might imagine. We've heard a little bit past homophobia in the past of Eremos, but I think Eremos has been part of what you might call the queering strains in Australian spirituality, in the sense of queer as being sensing, seeing, and speaking slant. And that's what I think LGBTIQ people have always had to do, but which others do too when they're at their best. So these words come from a very queer figure called the platypus, very indigenous. There's an Eremos story behind it. During an interview years ago, I once asked a group of Eremos Illuminati what kind of bird or animal Eremos was. And Rob Brennan, I think, suggested the platypus because it was often unseen, a little bit curious, but pretty damn resilient and quite queer. And I think we've had that sense, in the most interesting sense of the word. So here's the prayer. Spirit of creative love, as the platypus finds food in dark waters with seemingly closed eyes and sixth sense, may we rejoice in uniqueness and singularity revealed in human diversity and multiplicity. As the pelican plunge dives for fish with accuracy and precision, may we watch and work together, bringing dreams of the impossible to birth. And as the rainbow lorikeet brings joy and spectacle with brilliant colours and flashing hues, may we dance and sing. With the rich blessings of queer angels above us, courage, compassion and joy be with you now and always. Amen.
I think we should have another round of applause just for everybody, for everything.